Welcome back, everybody. This is for our very last class for Tuesday, and that happens to be for May 10th. And I wanted to talk about a poem entitled Coca-Cola and Coco Frio, written by Martin Espada, who happens to be a professor at UMass Amherst and an English professor. And basically, he began his career as an attorney for the disenfranchised and would write in his spare time. And over the years, he's flipped. So now he does pro bono work for the disenfranchised, and now he writes as a full-time professor. And I believe that he will be one of these authors that will be included in the canon and will be quite well known hundreds of years from now. I think that highly of him. Of course, we don't know who or what will stand the test of time, but I believe that our last two poets, Martin Espada and also Amanda Gorman, will be able to do that. But as contemporary poets, of course, we don't know. But I wanted to read this poem to you. It's not included in our textbook, but you can see that there is a link below. And I think this particular poem does a very nice job of sort of summarizing many of the themes that we've talked about over the course of the semester. And the poem reads, "On his first visit to Puerto Rico, island of family folklore, the fat boy wandered from table to table with his mouth open. At every table, some great aunt would steer him with cool, spotted hands to a glass of Coca-Cola. One even sang to him in all the English she could remember, a Coca-Cola jingle from the 40s. He drank obediently, though he was bored with this potion, familiar from soda fountains in Brooklyn. Then, at a roadside stand off the beach, the fat boy opened his mouth to Coco Frio, a coconut chilled, then scalped by a machete, so that a straw could inhale the clear milk. The boy tilted the green shell overhead and drooled coconut milk down his chin. Suddenly, Puerto Rico was not Coca-Cola or Brooklyn, and neither was he. For years afterwards, the boy marveled at an island where the people drank Coca-Cola and sang jingles from World War II in a language they did not speak, while so many coconuts in the trees sagged heavy with milk, swollen and unsuckled." And you need to understand a little bit about the history of Puerto Rico, which is not a state in the United States, but it is a territory, which means that it has some, but not all of the rights that would be accorded to the United States. Mostly it's about tax breaks and tax obligations. But Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So they're in this in-between state where they are afforded U.S. citizenry, but they aren't oftentimes given the same compensations as U.S. citizens. So there's been a good amount of conversation about whether or not Puerto Rico should declare itself as an independent nation. And there's lots of political debate for the pros and the cons of that. And if you keep in mind that Martin Espada is talking about his time in Brooklyn, this is a somewhat autobiographical poem because while he is Puerto Rican, he was raised in New York City. And Brooklyn and Puerto Rico share the fact that they are both islands, even though we don't tend to think of New York and New York City in particular as an island, but it is. And Puerto Rico is, of course, a tropical island, and it means beautiful port, Puerto Rico, and rich port. If you were going to Puerto Rico, if you were going to translate it into English. And so he's contrasting these two islands, that he's returning to his homeland from his ancestors, but he goes as if he is a tourist because he has been raised in New York City. And the fat boy, which he admits was himself, but also is a symbol of the United States, that the United States is fat with its excess, wandered from table to table with his mouth open, the idea that he's hungry for something. Basically, he's hungry for his culture. It's an idea that we've seen, for instance, in Raisin in the Sun, when we talked about Beneatha. And at every table, some great aunt would steer him with cool spotted hands. So in other words, this is the older generation. to a glass of Coca-Cola, which is probably one of the most well-known advertising symbols in America. And it definitely does represent America, and it also is known globally as well. And if you think about Coca-Cola, basically, it's just sugar water. Colored sugar water that's terribly unhealthy and artificial, and that results in big profits for large corporations. That's going to be the exact opposite of what he discusses later when he talks about Coco Frio. And she sang in all the English she could remember Coca-Cola jingle. Now, in Puerto Rico, the official language is Spanish. English is secondary. But most Puerto Ricans have some knowledge of both. He drank obediently, though he was bored with this potion familiar from soda fountains in Brooklyn. In other words, he's looking for something that's much more true to his heritage. Then at a roadside stand off the beach, and again, this is as local as you're going to get, the fat boy opened his mouth to Coco Frio. And Coco Frio, in contrast to Coca-Cola, is a coconut chilled, which you can scalp with a machete, and so that a straw can inhale the clear milk. Lots of images of milk and suckling, the idea that this boy is looking for his homeland or his motherland. And drooled coconut milk down his chin, which goes to show how hungry he is for something that's authentic from his culture. Suddenly, Puerto Rico was not Coca-Cola or Brooklyn, and neither was he. And for years afterwards, the boy marveled at an island where the people drank Coca-Cola and sang jingles from World War II. In other words, an island that's been completely assimilated by American culture in a language they did not really speak. While so many coconuts in the trees sagged heavy with milk, swollen and unsuckled. The idea is that individuals aren't taking care of the cultural gifts or are not appreciating the cultural gifts that surround them and are not using them. And I think we can extrapolate this for anyone who is surrounded by a certain level of abundance. I always think of New England and apples, yet wanting something that's much more exotic. But that said, it definitely is a commentary on the assimilation of Puerto Rico as an island, and also is a commentary on the search for cultural authenticity, represented by this boy who also is a representation of the United States. And I, as a Puerto Rican who grew up in New York, I wasn't born in Puerto Rico, but I was born in New York, I can very much connect with some of the themes of this particular poem. The last poem is a poem from Amanda Gorman. I don't know if you were fortunate enough to actually watch this poem initially performed at the last presidential inauguration. And I remember watching it and at the ending of it thinking to myself, in fact, I even posted this on social media, I've just seen the future of poetry, and her name is Amanda Gorman. And I think that sometimes there is an element about poetry that tends to be overanalyzed, and that sometimes you can just enjoy poetry purely for the sake of enjoying poetry, which is how I wanted you to enjoy The Hill We Climb. I wanted you to listen to it. I didn't want to ruin it with any kind of commentary. And I wanted you to think about the January 6th insurrection and about Amanda Gorman's poem of hope and optimism during the inauguration. And you can see the link below so that you can actually watch her perform that during the inauguration. And that basically is our poetry section. As I had indicated, you should be handing in a journal where you are responding to 3 poems in our poetry section, approximately a page for each poem. And I'm grading it informally, not for grammar or mechanics, just for content on a checkmark system. And I'll get that back to you before the final exam. And I had indicated that you had some options with the final, and the choice was May 12th, which is Thursday at 1 o'clock. So I will post the final on May 12th, Thursday at 1 o'clock, and you will have 24 hours in which to respond to that final. I'm going to be selecting a series of poems and asking you to choose one, or I'm sorry, asking you to choose 2, and to explicate or analyze those poems. I'm also going to ask you 2 brief questions about short story and also about drama, and ask you to briefly respond to those. And that would basically put closure to the class as a whole. So I hope you are doing well. I am doing well. As for paper number 2, I'm working on evaluating those and returning them back to students. And I wanted to leave you with a message, hopefully, of hope and inspiration. And this is a message from my pug. And her name is Biscotti Cappuccino the pug. And you will see that that is the very last video. Thank you for being here in this very challenging of semesters as we've experienced in the last couple of years. And I hope you enjoy the poem by Amanda Gorman as well as the message from my pug. Take care. Bye-bye.